America's most successful and highly rated news show presenter, perhaps of all time, Tucker Carlson, has taken a piece of my heart and torn into the Australian mainstream media and especially the ABC for their twisted priorities in terms of the stories that they cover. Tucker has been in Australia this past week doing a series of shows with Clive Palmer's Australian Freedom Conference. He took some questions from the media in Canberra on Wednesday night, and he learned what a joke Australian journalism has become firsthand. First, this question from the delightful 9 media newspapers, The Age and Sydney Morning Herald.
The media can be extremely negative, so it's nice to hear uplifting comments about our country.
It's an amazing country.
It is, and I think we forget that in Australia oftentimes, so I appreciate that. You've preempted my question on Putin.
Putin!
I think you did strategically because you knew it's what we'd ask.
Putin! He's so bad!
Mainstream right-wingers like Boris Johnson, Australian Liberals, some of their MPs are in the crowd, are vehemently anti-Putin. They believe he's a reprehensible figure who doesn't believe in the values of conservatism, such as the rule of law and democracy, which gives us the freedoms we have in our country. I'm interested, do you feel any level of shame or regret that you were termed a useful idiot, and then post your interview, Vladimir Putin himself said in his Russian media that he was surprised at how weak your questions were, and he also said that you were wrong when you said that no other journalist had asked to interview him. He said, that's not true. We only thought Tucker was the only person to report fairly.
I thought that you were describing Putin as a psychopathic liar, and yet now you're taking his word for things?
Now, I can't begin to unpack how passive-aggressive that question was from the Sydney Morning Herald's and Melbourne Age's Paul Sakal, how unjournalistic it was, how editorial it was, and laced with self-assured self-righteousness. It was typical of the Sydney and Melbourne journo set. A 2-minute lecture, not a question. And I edited it down. The question was basically, you're an idiot. Are you ashamed of your interview with Putin? And Tucker was smart enough to call it out right up front.
Let me just quickly unpack your absurd soliloquy if I can. First, I'm stuck on the idea that Boris Johnson is a right-winger. Do you know Boris Johnson? I do. Boris Johnson is a criminal buffoon who, like so many who claim to love Ukraine, is single-handedly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men in this war that Ukraine cannot win. And I would refer you to Wikipedia. How many more people does Russia have than Ukraine? Do you know? 100 million. 100 million. And in a land war, that's a relevant number. It is not possible for Ukraine to beat Russia. The best they can do is sue for peace. That's been known, including by Zelensky, who wanted that since the early days of this conflict. And Boris Johnson, on orders from the Biden administration, shut down, and this is not a disputed fact, this is a fact, admitted by everybody now, shut down the peace negotiations almost 2 years ago. And Ukraine has been completely destroyed. And now Zelensky has passed a law allowing foreign corporations to own land there. So you tell me what Ukraine is going to look like in 30 years.
Tucker Carlson speaks his mind. He's razor sharp and he's one of the best broadcasters and communicators the planet has ever seen. He got fired from Fox News for doing what journalists are supposed to do, asking probing, more difficult questions and actually challenging the rulers, the elites and those in power. He would criticise both the left and the right. He never asks anyone to agree with what he says. I certainly don't agree with him some of the time. And he believes his role in interviews is to shut up and let the other person speak and let the audience think for themselves, something most Australian journalists wouldn't be caught dead doing. Tucker became immensely successful. To understand just how successful, take a look at this. These are the ratings for America's 3 biggest 24-hour cable news channels. Fox consistently outrates the ratings of left-wing lunatics at MSNBC and the left-wing bores at CNN combined. 2 million viewers in prime time. But what you can't see here is what Tucker used to rate. He used to consistently get 4 to 6 million views for his show. And he was fired at his peak. It's hard to understand how any shareholder of News Corp could be happy with the decision to remove him. But they did, because he wouldn't toe the line.
What's happened in Ukraine, orchestrated by the Western powers, including your government, and I hope you do, and driven by my government, I feel shame about it, I hope you do too, is really one of the great crimes of my lifetime. So the idea that somehow if you're against that, you're for Putin, well, of course, that's absurd. And by the way, speaking of your friend Boris Johnson, he attacked me, of course, ad hominem, and so I called him. He was a journalist, not surprisingly, a man of low character, not shocking. And so I called him and I said, well, you've called me all these names. Why don't you sit down for a conversation? I happen to be in your rainy, depressing slum, London, and we could have a conversation. And he said, I won't do that unless you pay me $1 million. That's a fact. That's an non-disputed fact. I have the text messages. Well, just today, Julian Assange was released after 12 years. 12 years in custody, and your government did nothing. The UK made it possible, and the United States demanded it. You tell me how that's consistent with the rule of law or democracy. It's not. It's ruled by the intel agencies. It's lawlessness, and it's a crime. So I'm not saying that we're morally equivalent to Putin. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is our concern should be first and foremost, how are our countries run? And we give our own leaders a pass time and time again because they point to some other creep on the world stage and say, he's bad. Kim Jong-un is bad. Well, yeah, of course he's bad. That's why I don't live in North Korea. That's why I don't live in Russia. I have no interest in living in Russia. But the point is, you're bad too. And the fact that he's bad does not allow you to continue being bad.
I used to be an Australian journalist. I had my issues with the news and the way we reported it back in the 80s and 90s when I was working at 3AW and Channel 10 and the ABC and Triple M and 4BC. But when I came back to Australia in 2020, after 18 years abroad, not only could I not stand to work in TV news, I couldn't stand to watch it. So I started this show. The problem with journalism in Australia today starts with academia. Our universities have journalism schools, and instead of teaching stuff that journalists should have to know, like economics, statistical analysis, basic math, how business works, how politics actually works, the so-called academics, because they themselves aren't intelligent enough to understand any of that stuff, teach journalism students social science rubbish. And I put science in quotation marks there. That is nothing but left-wing indoctrination. They teach activism journalism. And brilliantly, the left have managed to infiltrate our newsrooms with Labor and Greens voters with no idea of how the world actually works, pretending to be journalists. And that is the commercial media. At the ABC, it's like they never even left uni.
I really resent what I have seen across the West in the past 15 years, and it's a sea change from my youth when my father was a reporter, this alignment between media organizations and the government. I find disgusting, actually. I think it's a perfect inversion of what you're supposed to do. If you're a journalist, your job is to challenge power on behalf of the powerless. It is not to align with the powerful against the powerless. And that is precisely what you have done. I watched your ABC this morning in my hotel room for about 20 minutes until I looked around for a vomit bag. And I watched, it was one of the most grotesque, I couldn't even believe it was real.
Oh, it's real, all right. And we're all forced to pay for it. If we refuse, we go to jail. Tucker said the second story on the ABC News was about 4 Australians being found dead in a house because of a drug overdose on a new synthetic opioid. Then the next story was about the move by the government to require prescriptions to buy nicotine.
And we were treated to a 15-minute lecture on ABC, whatever the hell that is, about how nicotine is dangerous and we need to keep it out of the hands of Australians. And I'm like, wait a second. Nicotine, first of all, is not dangerous. That's not true. It's factually incorrect. You know nothing about the science, A. B, compared to what? Compared to what? Oh, we have this new synthetic opioid that's killing people. The government, not too concerned. What they're really concerned about is that people might be using nicotine, which, by the way, has the byproduct of raising testosterone levels and making people a little harder to command. That's a massive threat. So this is the point where the media gets involved and says, wait a second, let's chart the death toll from vaping versus fentanyl. Maybe one's a little worse than the other. And what exactly are you doing about it? Why don't you press your ministers and your prime minister? Like, what are you doing about it, about drug use? And the answer is nothing.
Tucker says the failure of the media to properly report on the injuries and deaths from vaccines used during the COVID crisis is astounding.
And the COVID vax, the mRNA vax from Pfizer, has caused more injuries than all self-reported injuries than all the previous vaccination campaigns for the last 50 years combined. And no one in the media has written a story about it. Because, well, there are a couple reasons. One is that Pfizer is one of the largest advertisers on television in the United States. And the point is not to sell the product. And I worked in television my whole life. So this is not speculation. The point is not to sell some weird drug for rheumatoid arthritis to TV viewers because people can't prescribe their own drugs. No, that's not the point. This is not a retail sales pitch. This is an insurance policy that the drug makers are buying with the big media companies. We're your biggest advertiser. Maybe if we have a lot of vax injuries from a brand new product, you won't say too much, and they don't. I think that's completely corrupt and shameful.
On that note, I might pass you over to Andrew Green from the ABC.
Oh, I love it. You going to take my nicotine? It's dangerous.
Good afternoon, Tucker.
A prescription for nicotine. Okay.
I missed that segment this morning.
It's shocking. You should watch it. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen on television.
I do want to ask about a country you haven't mentioned today, and that's China.
I just love the way Tucker pops the nicotine gum into his mouth as he takes down the ABC guy. It is gold. Nicotine is pretty harmless, by the way. Addictive, but harmless. It's the smoke in cigarettes that's dangerous. Anyway, back to China, and probably the most important answer for Australia's dumb, distracted media.
Do you think China poses a threat here?
I think that, first of all, I think it's very complicated, but I think the overview is this. China has 1.4 billion people and not enough resources or land. Australia has 26 million people and a sparsely populated continent that is brimming, overflowing with resources that countries with expanding economies need. And I don't know how expensive your politicians are. I'm guessing not very. So I don't think it'd be too much of a lift for China to just buy them all. And I assume they already are doing that. I mean, obviously they are doing that. And they're doing that in my country too. They bought the current president's son. So I'm not mad at China for that. Well, they did. They bought Hunter Biden. I mean, that's the whole story. And it's proven. Okay. So I'm not mad at China about that, just for the record. I'm not particularly anti-China. I don't want to live in China. It's not my system at all. And I find a lot of parts of the culture repugnant. On the other hand, I see China, a country acting in its own interest. So I'm not mad about that. I'm mad about the countries like my own and possibly yours that allow themselves to be taken advantage of. That's the truly shameful thing.
An uplifting analysis there, but unfortunately true. Now, we've saved the best for last. There is nothing so brainwashed as the young, self-righteous, obnoxious brat Australian journalist, all full of opinions and hubris, unjustified by their age and inexperience, and with zero respect, of course, for any far more experienced person, particularly if they're a man over 50. This is the delightful Kat Wong from AAP.
Hi, Tucker. Thank you so much for your address today. So you talked a little bit about immigration, and in the past you've talked about how white Australians, Americans, Europeans are being replaced by non-white immigrants in what is often referred to as the Great Replacement Theory. This is the same...
Have I said that whites are being replaced?
Well...
I don't think I said that.
Well, it's been mentioned on your show 4,000 times. And
really, when did I say that?
On your
I said
show,
whites are being replaced?
You have said that before.
Really?
Yeah.
I would challenge you to cite that because I'm pretty sure I haven't said that. I said native-born Americans are being replaced, including blacks.
Native-born Americans.
Native-born Americans.
And
Americans like black Americans African Americans have been in the United States for, in many cases, their families over 400 years. And their concerns are every bit as real and valid and alive to me as the concerns of white people whose families have been there 400 years. So I've never said that whites are being replaced. Not one time. And you can't cite it.
Untrue.
So,
Oh my God, I'm Kat Wong. Nobody ever challenges me. I'm an Asian Australian female under 40. You don't get to challenge me. I'm a protected species. I'm allowed to make stuff up and tell lies. I'm immune from fault.
we just met, but when our relationship starts with a lie, it makes it tough to be friends. So let's
you've been lying
let's
about
pull
my
that back. I'm
fellow
happy to
colleagues
explain what I
as
do
well,
think.
so-
You actually can't say it because I didn't say it, and I don't believe it. And I'm telling you that to your face, so why don't you just accept me at face value? My
because it's
concern
not
is that
true.
the people who are born in the country are the main responsibility of its leaders. And as noted earlier, when those leaders shift their concern from the people whose responsibility it is to take care of to people around the world to put their priorities above that of their own citizens, that's immoral. And they are being replaced in my country, people who are born in the United States. And the birth rate tells the whole story. they're not at replacement rate. And so the US population is growing because we're importing people from other countries. And my view is that happy people have children, and a functioning economy allows them to do that. And we don't have that. And so you need to fix the economy and fix the culture and make it so that people who want to have kids can. You don't just go for the quick sugar fix of importing new people. Like, that's my position. And if you think that's racist, that's your problem.
I never called you a racist.
But of course you are suggesting, and
Well,
I must say, one of the
suggesting that
reasons
white
people don't
people-
like people like you in the media is that you never say exactly what you mean. Your slurs are all by implication, and you're about to tell me the great replacement theory is racist or anti-Semitic, whatever. I've said what I've said to you right now like 100 times in public. I hope to, if I live long enough, say it 100 more times. I think it's completely honest and real, not racist or scary. It's factually true. It's not a theory, it's a fact. And the whole point of your question was to be like, you're a scary racist.
Well, I haven't
And my
answered my
response is, no, I'm not. Okay, well, how about no more lying in your questions, and then I'll answer it.
I didn't call you racist. No, but you were just implying it like out of control. I mean, these kids are out of control, Australia. This is not okay. He called her out on her calling him a racist. She claims she didn't, but I'm sorry. That was clearly the intent of her line of questioning. But does she show any remorse or professionalism and then back off a bit? Oh no. Just like any kid who's never been mentored properly because everyone is too afraid to mentor young women these days, she doubles down in her absolute arrogance.
This is the same theory, or as you say, idea, that has inspired the New York Buffalo shooting where 11 black Americans were killed.
On.
Two
You know what
white
I mean?
Americans were killed.
Like,
And it's also
okay,
inspired
it's not, first of all,
it's inspired one of the worst Australian guns
how do
of
they
all
get
time
people
to
this
shoot
stupid in the media? I guess it doesn't pay well. Look, I'm sorry. I've lived among people like you for too long, and I don't mean to call you stupid. Maybe you're just pretending to be, but I'm totally against violence. I'm totally against the war in Ukraine, for example, which doubtless you support. And like all dutiful liberals, support more carnage. I don't. I hate mass shootings, actually. Nothing I said, what does it mean to inspire something? My views are not bigoted against any group. They're honest. They're factual. That's not hate. That's reality. And my views derive from my deep concern for Americans, actually. Americans aren't having kids because they can't afford to. And nobody in charge cares. And so that's my position. That doesn't inspire mass shootings. How dare you try to tie me to some lunatic who murdered people? How dare you, actually?
Yeah, how dare you? You call him a racist in the clear underlying premise of your first question. Then you gaslight him and claim that you didn't. Then instead of having the maturity and good character to check yourself and back off a bit, you obnoxiously double down and absurdly imply that he's responsible for mass shootings. That is not journalism. That is not okay. And AAP should do something about it. That is grossly immoral and unethical behaviour for anyone, let alone someone who claims to be a journalist. And then you keep going.
Right, so therefore you support gun control?
What? I thought it
You
couldn't
don't
get
want any
dumber,
more
but
shootings?
it did.
Yeah, I thought it couldn't get any dumber, but it did. I apologise, Tucker. That, folks, is the level, that's the state of my former profession, which is really a trade, journalism. That's the state of Australian journalism right now. Shame on her and every jerk who's ever enabled her by employing her and those like her in Australian newsrooms to progress their careers unsupervised and unchallenged because they're protected by our insane workplace cultural guidelines that prevent grown-ups scolding out of control children when they should be. We have totally lost the plot in the workplace, Australia. Young people need to respect their elders again, especially, by the way, the male ones for a change, and listen and learn and be told when you are playing wrong and out of line. We have a cultural crisis, and that was the perfect example of the danger of it. Did you know lots of Aussie YouTubers have to make American content to survive? We want to keep producing Aussie news, and to do that, we need your direct help. If you'd like to advertise on our show, please get in touch in the comments below or DM us on Twitter. Our Australian content means we deliver mostly an Aussie audience. Or if you'd just like to help us with a donation, please click on the Super Thanks button that's with the little dollar sign right under the video frame just here. Or just click the subscribe button and bell. That's free and it helps a lot.